All right, now I'm recording. Okay. So sorry for forgetting to record. Going to start with objects. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way and then sort of come up in time and do it in a fancier way. There's not a big difference here. It's just JavaScript's an old language, and they used to do objects in a way that was very different from other languages, and then they sort of brought into JavaScript the sort of more regular what the rest of the world does with objects and classes. Okay, so where am I at? Did I extract it? I think I extracted it. I should have a horror. Folder, go to downloads. Okay. Open folder, downloads, okay, and show me the Explorer, and there it is, horror object protocol, okay. So to start off, I put everything in one file, and I am opening it with the live server. I have this display of horror movies, and there's a drop-down list, and it tells me the rank of the horror movie, the rating of the horror movie, how many people rated the horror movie, description, some picture, and okay, and I have this weird font. Okay, so that font, I use the approach where I put the TTF that describes the font along with the other files. So here are my images, here's my HTML, here are my TTFs. And I said, I use this thing in style to announce I'm using this font. Here's the file for the font, and I'm going to call it the bleeding font. And there's my header, and it uses the bleeding font. Okay. And I have a span for the rank, and it uses the bleeding font. Okay. I have a grid. We've talked about grids. So here's my grid that spans 2 columns. Here is a cell that spans 3 rows. And now I'm into the HTML. Here that makes my grid, my wrapper. Each class belongs to box. Each div belongs to the box class, but also its own individual class. Here's a select that's empty, and place for the description and so on. Okay, I'm on to the script. I have an empty array. Here is my old style, the prototype style of making an object in JavaScript. So you use the keyword function, and then you give the function a name. You have arguments, which are the properties I'm going to assign to the function. This is effectively my constructor. So when I make a horror movie, I'm going to send in all this information. I'm going to send in a rank, a rating, a title, an image, a number of people who rated it, and a description. And then I'm going to take that first thing that came in, which I called a rank, and I'm going to assign it to the rank property. So these 2 things have to match. What comes in as an argument, and then what gets over here is on the right-hand side of the assignment statement. They have to match. And then over here is the name of the property of my object. These can match. They can all be rank, but they don't have to be. But these 2 have to agree. And then once I start using my object, these are the things I need to use. So the A rank is just an internal thing, whereas the rank is once I make an object, that's what I use. That's more external. Okay, so that is, there's no method here. It was just a collection of related properties, and I'm calling it an object. And we're using the old style JavaScript where you call the prototype and you use the keyword function. I'm setting up a change event. I have a bunch of data here. We'll get to files. I love files, but I'm not ready for files yet. So here's just a big long string that I'm going to parse. And here's the first movie is of Psycho. So here's all the information about Psycho. And then there is a pound sign or a number sign or a hashtag, whatever you want to call it, and then starts the second movie. So between movies, there's a hashtag. Between pieces of information about a movie, there's a vertical bar. I'm going to first split the data on that hashtag. That creates a set of information about each movie. So it creates for me an array. I'm looping over that array. I'm splitting that line on the second delimiter, or the inner delimiter, if you will, of the vertical bar. And I decided to call that subdata for I don't know what reason. And 119 is the first way I made a movie. I'm making an array of movies. So my movies I is a new keyword new, says use my constructor. And the first time I did it, I said subdata 0, subdata 1, subdata 2. But because the order in which I defined my object and the order of data that comes out of splitting the information is the same order, I can use what's called a spread operator, and I can just say ... subdata. And that corresponds to subdata 0, subdata 1, subdata square bracket 2, etc. So 119 and 120 have the same effect, just 120 is like easier to write. But it does rely on the fact that the order was the same. So I specifically put rank and then rating because that was the order I had here. I had that Psycho was the first movie that had a rating of 8.7. So that trick only works if there's that coordination. So I loop through the array, I parse the data, I start looping through the array, I parse the data again, I use that second parse data to instantiate an object. Now I have an array of objects. I grab the select. I'm looping over my array. I'm making a new option. I'm setting the text of the option to the element of the array is an object. It has a title property. So that's the title of the movie. And then when I have an array of things, the value that I find most useful to work with is the index of the array. So I set the value equal to I, and I append it to the select. So I populated my select. My page was empty. There was the image had no source. There was no rating. There was no description, no anything. And that's all going to be completed by the function called when the person changes the drop-down select, which is choose movie. And what I'm doing here in 149 and 150 is pretending that the user used the drop-down list to pick the first movie. So I'm saying, let's pretend there's a change event and that there was a change event in the my select. And then that, because the change event for the select calls choose movie, I'm effectively calling choose movie here. I go to the select, I get the value. It is an index. And so I called it my index. And then my movies was my array of object. My movies, my index was an element of that array, which is an object. And it has various properties. It had an image property. I use that to set the source of the element called with an ID of IMG movie. The description goes in the description, the rating goes in the rating, the rank goes in the rank. Okay, you get the idea. And I'm at the bottom of the script and the bottom of the body. So that is version 1. That's the old style of making an object. The key word you see is function. Now we're going to switch to the more modern version, and that word function is going to become class, which is sort of, I don't know, more normal, more like Java, Python, other modern languages. Okay. So that is going to be version 2. And I'm going to make the switch from prototype to class type objects. And then I'm also going to be a little bit more sophisticated, sort of split my code up a little bit more. And what else am I going to do? Probably add an event listener. Okay. So that was version 1. Here's version 2 from a class. Okay, so same thing. Now it's the class version. So now I split the CSS and the HTML and the JavaScript, or at least some of the JavaScript I've separated. And it does the same thing for the most part. Open with a live server. I introduced some actual star looking ratings down here. That's a one new feature. So again, does pretty much the same thing, same boring bleeding font. I added this little star thing. Okay. The stars I got from Font Awesome. So this is a little bit old. So this is the way at least Font Awesome used to do it. It's one of those sites that's always changing the way they do things, but okay. Here's my CSS. I didn't change my CSS. I just made it external. So we talked about the CSS. We talked about the grid. I have moved the class out to an external JS file, but I did not move the script out. So I did not move, I moved the class out, but I did not move the code that uses the class out. So I moved some of the JavaScript out of the HTML, but not all of it. Okay, so here is my horror movie class. So now we're using the keyword class. And so this is a little bit more like what you might have seen in Java or Python, where it is, you start with the keyword class. You're using the word constructor. Before we had something that was a constructor, but we didn't call it a constructor. Now we call it a constructor. This is the same thing as that function, except now it's called, now we have class, and here's the name of the class. And then we have the constructor, and then we pretty much have that function we had before. And then I added a method. So there were these numerical ratings. And then I wrote this really crappy function, lots of ifs. I'd probably yell at you if you did it, then here I go do it. But if it was a more than an 8.75 rating, I'm calling it a 4 stars. If it's greater than 7.5, I'm calling it 3.5 stars, and so on. So that's what that method does. And it's just this idea that a class, in addition to bringing some data together, can bring related methods together. So one method that might be important for a movie is this two style. There's a rating out of 10, and there's a rating out of 4. And the ratings out of 4 don't allow any arbitrary fractions, but only allow halves. Okay. So that was the class. I put a script tag here to connect to the class. So it comes before the rest of my stuff here. So when if I refer to an object of the class, it will say I know what you mean because it's already encountered this horror movie class.js file. So most of this we've seen before. I'll go relatively fast, but maybe slow down if there are changes. There's an array for my movies. I decided to work in a load event. I don't know why I decided to do a load event. I'm sort of already in a load event because I'm at the bottom of the page. So it waits for the bottom of works for the page to be loaded because the script is at the bottom of the page. So this is a little bit overkill. I added a change listener for the select. I have the same big long string of information. I split it on the pound hashtag. I loop through the array. I split it on the vertical bar. I'm using the keyword new to say use my constructor. I'm doing this spread thing again. I'm looping through my array to create options for my select. I'm making them the title, what the user sees, the title of the movie, the value, the index of the movie, and I'm adding the select. I'm triggering a select event so that the user thinks that it looks like the user chose a movie when the page starts. When they choose a movie, I grab the value, which is an index. So I called it my index. And then I'm using my movies. My index is an object of is an element of my array, which is an object. And those objects have properties like image, rank, title, and so on. There was a function up here. I decided, in addition to the rating is sort of like 8.7, whereas convert rating will be like 3.5 stars. So here I am using a method of my class, and then make stars is a function that's defined here in this HTML, in this script part of this HTML. So convert rating belongs to the class and is over in the other file. Make stars is here in this file. And it's another crappy program that says if the rating was yada yada yada, then return, and this is 4 stars, and this is 3.5 stars, and this is three stars. And in Font Awesome, you have filled star. You can get a filled star, you can get a half-filled star, and you can get an empty star. So I'm just using, as I come down here, oh, here's the filled star, here's the half-filled star, so on. So another crappy function, okay. And that's giving me this weird star business. So this star rating 3.5, that was the 3.5, that was a method that was built into my class. Whereas the stars, that Font Awesome star stuff, that was in the JavaScript that was within the HTML. Any questions? So there wasn't a big change from prototype to class. Mainly they're just some of the key words. It's easier to add a method. You could add a method when you had a prototype, but it was a little bit harder. And really, you just want to, if you're learning it, I put in the prototype so that you've seen the sort of whole history of things. But if you're just learning it fresh, then forget the prototype and just move straight into the class. Okay. I still have a lot of JavaScript in my HTML, and that's what I want to solve next. I want to move this JavaScript in the HTML out to a separate place. So it's going to be, again, mostly the same, it does the same stuff, mostly the same code, but I'd like to move this stuff out of the HTML. And I'm going to do that in two ways. And so I have two more programs to show you, but there's very little new stuff in those programs to show you. Okay, okay. So here I'm going to have two JS files. One's going to be the class, one's going to be the use of the class. All right, where am I at? Here. So here is protocol. Here is two JS files. So I have the CSS, nothing to see. I have HTML, I have Java, I have the horror movie class JS, and I have the use class. Okay. So the CSS we've seen, there's nothing new here. The HTML now has two script tags that relate to external JavaScripts. So first I relate to the class, and then, so all I did was took all that code that was in the HTML and I put it in this use class.js, and then here it is. So that's just a reordering, just putting it in a different place and referring to it. So in some sense, I don't know, nothing to see here except I feel better about myself. I don't know, I guess it's easy for me to feel better about myself, but I feel a little bit better about myself when I've separated my JavaScript from my HTML from my CSS. I often don't do it. That makes me feel bad about myself, but this makes me feel good about myself, so I did it. But I wasn't completely happy. And so I made the next version where I had in the HTML, I refer to one JavaScript, and then that JavaScript refers to the other JavaScript. So that's going to be the last version. And that involves what I'm going to call a module. So here is the last one to show you. Come on. And it's not a big change. Too many things open. And this one is version B with modules. There's the CSS, there's the HTML, there's the class, and the class. Okay. All right. So the CSS is not changed. So forget that. The HTML refers to use class _ B. So now there's only one file here, and it is the file that uses the class. And then the class, the use class, will refer to the class. So this says I'm going to do some stuff for the page. So this is the part that refers to the HTML page. So it makes sense and it's linked to in the HTML. And that's use class B here. And then here is the import. So this is me in the, so the HTML refers to a JS file, and then that JS file says, I have another JS file that I'm going to use, so let me import it. So I go to horror movie class underscore B. I don't think this really changed, but I just wanted to have the files to have different names so you could distinguish them if you ended up with them all together somehow. So the class file didn't really change, but the use class is, instead of the HTML referring to two JavaScripts, the HTML refers to one JavaScript, the latter JavaScript, and the latter JavaScript refers to the earlier JavaScript rather than the HTML doing it. And so we use the keyword import. And so this is us bringing in that other file we made. Okay. So you get your, you probably shouldn't do the prototype stuff, but you don't have to go this, you don't need to use modules or anything. So you can do it however, you should probably use the class, but other than that, if you want the class in the same file, or if you want it in a separate folder or file, if you want two separate files, that make up your own mind how you want to do it. Well, that's me talking again and on YouTube. All right, so here's so I gave you some head start with a grid and also a big thing of data. And so mainly I wanted to give you that big string of data, but also the grid. Okay. And then here are the instructions. Okay, so you're going to start with the head start. You have that big string to parse. You're going to make an object, an array of objects. So you're going to define a class with those properties. You're going to use those properties to put things in a drop-down list, just like the example. When the person chooses the select, you're going to show an image. You're going to say how long it is. You're going to have a link over to a video and a link over to lyrics. I show, do I still have that open? I think I closed it. Here's an iframe going to show you the lyrics to the song, The Muffin Man. So the source is some base URL plus this muffin.txt. So you're sort of linking over to my website. Where is Word? Okay. So you're doing that with YouTube, you're doing that with the song image, you're doing it with the song lyrics. And then trigger it so that it looks like that the user's already chosen one when you start. So mostly a repeat of what we've done, the getting the images off the web and connecting to a YouTube, embedded YouTube video. That's a little bit different. See how you do, ask questions. Any questions for the recording? No.